Hello everyone, I'm George from Ireland, so welcome back to my YouTube channel. So now I'm commenting on the local elections in the United Kingdom, as well as the Scottish parliamentary election, the Welsh Assembly election, so forth, the London mayoral election. When I say local elections, these are two local authorities, whether it's your county council, borough council, urban district council, and so forth. So there's also a by-election yesterday night. Elections in the United Kingdom are always on a Thursday. Since the 14th of December 1918, they have always been on a Thursday. People say because there used to be a half day for shops on a Thursday. It's usually the first Thursday in May, the local elections. Some counties and cities have them in this year, 2021, others don't. Remember the London mayoral elections, the elections of the London Assembly was supposed to be last May, but they were rolled over for a year because of coronavirus. Actually, we could have done it all online or something, or postal voting, but he couldn't have campaigned in person. The term for the Mayor of London, the London Assembly, is 4 years, but because it was extended by 5 years, this current term beginning now will be 3 years, just to get it back in sync. So the big takeaway from this is the Hartlepool shock. Hartlepool, a constituency in northeast England, was a Labour bastion since 1974. Indeed, Peter Mandelson, one of the most prominent new Labour cabinet ministers, he sat for that constituency from 1992 till about 2005. Anyway, it's been lost. It's been taken by the Tories. Now, if even 5 years ago you told me the Conservatives were going to take Hartlepool, I think you'd had a few too many drinks, but it's happened. Now, this was one of the most Leave constituencies in the UK. About 70% of people voted Leave. The Brexit Party had about its best showing there in the 2019 election. Of course, the Brexit Party didn't win, they came third. But that showed the strength of Eurosceptic feeling there. So it was a local GP who was standing there for Labour against a Conservative woman. And I thought Labour was going to win this. They won it by 7 percentage points in the last general election. I thought they would win by even more. Some of those former Brexit Party voters were disgruntled Labourites who'd returned to the red side. Some of them were not bothered to vote. But no, it wasn't to be. The Conservatives have not only won it, but won it by a handsome margin. So I stand corrected. I never saw that one coming. So that's obviously a terrible result for Labour. It's dreadful that they should be defeated in their heartland, because North East England was one of the strongest Labour areas. That same Merseyside within England. So astonishing. It's very bad news for Sir Keir Starmer, who's leader of the Labour Party. So he's been leader of Labour for not quite a year and a half. But as leader of Her Majesty's most loyal opposition, his job is to not be in that job, is to make himself Prime Minister. And it doesn't look like it's happening. Because the life cycle of a government's popularity is, here we have the election, and they win, the whatever governing parties want, and their popularity shoots up immediately. The bandwagon effect, people say, well, Conservative won, I'll be a Conservative too. Then there's a bit of a plateau for a few months, and then it starts to dip. How does it dip? Kind of quite slowly, or does it dip quite drastically? So going down, and in the midterm, and we're into midterm. Remember, the parliamentary term is 5 years. Now, we had 3 elections in 2 years, so we're not going to have an early one again. We'll go for the whole parliament, the whole 5 years. Remember, you have to have a 2/3 majority to overcome the Fixed Terms Parliaments Act. Elections can be held outside the usual timetable these days if 2/3 of the House of Commons votes for that. In the old days, it was at the whim of the Prime Minister. It was just by his fiat. He'd request a dissolution of Parliament to force an election. The Queen would always agree. So he'd do that to suit the economic cycle, or have tax cuts or whatever, stimulate the economy to give him a better chance of being re-elected, which is why incumbents won most of the time. But incumbency is no longer going to confer such an advantage. The Conservatives have a majority, but it's not a 2/3 majority, so they'd have to get quite a few other MPs to vote for an early election, and I don't see that happening. Labour made that mistake in November 2019 to agree to one. Anyway, what else? Um, yeah, the Conservatives' popularity was quite good. Along came coronavirus only 3 months after the last election, and then it tumbled, going badly, mishandled, a lot of miscommunications, a lot of volte-face performed, chaos. They mishandled the situation. It seemed to be cronyism in dishing out these contracts without a proper tender. paying well over the odds for substandard service and the track and trace system, and on and on. There was the Dominic Cummings fiasco, him breaking lockdown by a mere 400 miles and not being dismissed from his post, and on and on. So rank hypocrisy. Even Bojo seemed to be in the dark about his own policy. He caught coronavirus. But anyway, we're through that now, and the vaccination program's gone very well. The UK is, I think I'm right in saying, the third most vaccinated country in the world. 55% of people have had at least one vaccination dose. Of adults, that's higher, like 60%. So no wonder the deaths have come down. So only about 10 deaths on some days, with about 40 deaths yesterday. I think we've just got used to it. This is the new normal. But anyway, because the vaccination program's gone quite well, and there's been the stimulus package, and it looks like the economy is going to grow very well, the popularity of the Conservative Party is quite high. 10% economic contraction last year. It was just eye-watering, apparently the worst in history, even in wartime. But it looks like it's going to bounce back by 7% this year, not quite recover everything that was lost last year. So there doesn't appear to be the midterm blues for the Blues, as you'd expect at the moment. The government's popularity is really high. At one stage, it was 14% ahead of the Labour Party. And remember, Labour lost by 10 percentage points the last general election. There was only one election where apparently parties made that up in a single term. 1992 election, Labour was 10% behind the Conservatives, and obviously the 1997 election, Labour was ahead of the Conservatives by 12 percentage points. So it's doable, but it's a big ask. I mean, more likely there might be some sort of hung parliament, or, I mean, Labour could win, but have to have a coalition partner like the Liberal Democrats. There are only 11 Lib Dem MPs these days, but that could make the difference between being a majority government and not. Just because there are 11 Lib Dem MPs now doesn't mean there will only be 11 next time. They could easily get more. Remember 2005 when they had 64 members of parliament. Now we'd be talking. I think the Lib Dems are not going to do that well, but they could easily get 20. Could they decline from 11? Yes, they could, but they're still pretty low rating for them. At only 9% of the vote. So I wouldn't quite say there's any way they can go up, but they could go up. But 9% is one of their lowest results in the last 50 years. Anyway, why did Labour lose? Well, they performed so poorly, I suppose, because they're associated with wokeness, because the Conservatives seem to have done quite well on coronavirus lately. I know that's really the doctors and the nurses, but the Conservative administration's managed to take the credit because of Labour's perceived unacceptance of Brexit to this day, and perhaps Sir Keir Starmer is just failing to connect, and he's someone I respect. He's got this distinguished career in public service before he entered politics. He's cerebral, he's dignified, he's old enough but not too old. He's got a lot going for him. He seems to sort of look the part to me. Safe pair of hands, reassuring. I can imagine him on the steps of 10 Downing Street about to go in as First Lord of the Treasury and feel comfortable with that. And I think that's the test to pass, the Downing Street test. Whereas Jeremy Corbyn, I think, for the great majority of people, didn't pass that. They were not content with the idea of him being Prime Minister. So perhaps Labour needs a new leader. Angela Rayner, their deputy leader, or David Lammy. These are some of the big beasts could take over. Reasonably experienced, perhaps charismatic, or indeed there are a few other candidates. So in Wales, Labour's going to win for the 5th time in the Senedd. That used to be called the Welsh Assembly. Senedd being the Welsh word for Parliament, so you can call it the Welsh Parliament. They only changed that a year ago. A record 5th victory for them. Well, all right, the Welsh Assembly has only existed since 1999. But there are 60 seats. Labour didn't quite have a majority last time. Looks like they're going to fall a bit more to say about 25 seats, have a coalition with the Liberal Democrats, possibly even some sort of confidence supply with Plaid Cymru. Plaid Cymru said they shan't be a junior coalition partner. Difficulty for them, Plaid Cymru, is their policy has been almost indistinguishable from that from Labour on coronavirus. Plaid Cymru recently sort of abandoned the hope of getting the United Kingdom back into the European Union. So the local elections as well, not been terribly good for Labour in county councils and city councils. And then the Scottish Parliament, the big question is, well, will the SNP have a majority? Now, they're the biggest single party. They had a plurality last time. They lost a couple of MSPs, but I think they will. I'm very unhappy about that. Just have a majority and try to have that second referendum. Boris Johnson probably very firmly said, no, absolutely not. You had your referendum. That's forever, or more like that, that's for a generation. But the Green Party will support them. They had 6 MSPs last time, so the SNP will able to struggle on in government. I mean, how could you keep the SNP out? It'd have to be everybody else doing it together, Labour and the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats. And I don't think that coalition is workable. There's a lot of tribalism there. A lot of Labour people would spit blood at the idea of getting into bed with the Conservatives. The Liberal Democrats at a Westminster level, remember, they had a coalition with the Conservatives that they formed in 2010. 11 years on, they still have nowhere near recovered from that. Remember, and they were getting 23% of the vote in 2010. They're now getting 9%. At one point, they got 6%. So they're not going to make that mistake again as they see it. They want to be tarred with Conservative unpopularity for austerity and so forth. So one of the few bright spots for Labour is London, where Sadiq Khan's going to win by about 20 percentage points, probably win at the first ballot, over 50% of the vote. Because remember, it's you put your preferences right number 1 by your first choice in the ballot paper, number 2 by your second choice, number 3 you right beside your third choice, and so forth. See if somebody wins over 50% of the first preferences, then he or she is Mayor of London straight away. If not, then they start eliminating the lower candidates and redistributing their second preferences or third preferences as the need may arise. So nobody's ever won it on the first ballot, but it looks like Sadiq Khan is going to. So he's been a reasonably effective Mayor of London, though crime has gone up. Now, he's only got some indirect control over that because, of course, we don't have politicised policing. He can direct overall policy, but he can't order them to arrest this person or that person. But again, he's affable, and there'll be no catastrophes on his watch. I mean, terrorist attacks happen now and again, but that's not because of him. So Labour's going to win there. He could well be Labour Prime Minister in time. So that's my assessment of it. It's a phenomenal night for the Conservatives. Probably going to be a good night for the SNP. I mean, the results are filtering through as we speak. Anna Sarwar, the leader of Scottish Labour, he made the audacious move of going head-to-head against Nicola Sturgeon, standing against her in her Glasgow constituency. Now, she's sure to win there because she's won by a country mile. Moreover, people tend to like having famous MPs. Look back to the 97 election. About the only place the Conservative vote went up was Huntingdon, which the Prime Minister John Major sat for. She's not going to be unseated. But there's a Glasgow list. He'll be elected on that. Remember, for the Scottish Parliament, there are, my goodness, it's 70 odd constituencies, and as in territorial constituencies, and then Scotland's divided into regions, 8 regions, as in Glasgow, Scotland South West, Scotland Central, and so forth. And there's 7 top-up MSPs for each region to make it a bit more proportional, because were it not for that, the SNP would win almost everything, and Labour and the Conservatives just a few, and the Lib Dems almost nothing, and the Greens absolutely nothing. So there's correct some of the inequities of the first past the post system, the sort of winner takes all system. Well, it doesn't even necessarily favour the party of the post most votes. It's all about efficient geographical distribution of votes in first past the post. Nicola Sturgeon will probably say we want a second referendum on splitting up the United Kingdom. Westminster will say no. She might hold one anyway. Other people say it's illegal. Some of the pro-union people might boycott it because if it comes out sort of like 98% yes to separation, that's just not credible. It seems farcical. Whereas if it was a sort of fairly good majority, like 58%, well, that's quite credible, like a real result. Moreover, the cruel irony from the SNP's perspective is that the European Union is actually an ally of the United Kingdom on this one. Remember Catalonia? No, absolutely no. The referendum, it doesn't count. Catalonia is part of Spain. You're not allowed to leave. We do not recognise that referendum. And the Spanish government been unwavering on that, backed by Brussels and Strasbourg. So where was the SNP then? Why weren't they speaking up for them? Where was Sinn Féin then, speaking up for these splittist forces? No, they dare not upset Brussels and Strasbourg, so the silence was deafening. They were stum on that one. And the European Union doesn't want to set a precedent. Then there would be spark off a chain reaction of what about the Basque Country, or for that matter, Valencia, or Galicia in Spain, or goodness, I don't know, in France, some of the Catalan Basque regions, or Brittany, or even Cannes or something like that, or the Dauphiné or Corsica, and almost every EU member state has got regions where there is arguably a national identity. And they'll be redrawing boundaries, and they'll just be constantly mired in these squabbles about frontiers and flags. Right, so that's just about everything from me. So make sure you subscribe to my channel. Please book online lessons with me in history, politics, citizenship, religious studies, English language, English literature, English as a foreign language, French, law, and other subjects, maths and science if you're little. Um, so remember, I'm a tour guide in Londinium whenever tourism reopens. I'll help you with interview preparation and you're writing your CV and things like that. I help people with essays, theses, dissertations, and so forth. Toodaloo.